Find your way out before I get back, she said. My daughter-in-law. My son's wife. The woman I once called my own child, now handing me eviction papers like I was a stranger in my own home. Do you know what it feels like to have your heart ripped out by someone you trusted? Someone you fed with your own hands? Someone you welcomed into your family like she was your own blood? That's what betrayal tastes like. It tastes like bile rising in your throat when you realize that all your kindness, all your sacrifices, all your love, it meant nothing. Less than nothing. It was seen as weakness. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. My voice was steady, but inside, something was breaking. Something that had held me together for decades was cracking like old glass. I only whispered to myself, I will teach her a lesson she forgot to learn, but not with anger, with proof. You see, when people hurt you this deeply, when they try to strip away everything you've built, everything you are, you have two choices. You can scream and rage like a wounded animal, or you can become something more dangerous. You can become quiet. And let me tell you something about quiet women who have been pushed too far. We don't break. We plan. Stay till the end, because when she came back, she didn't just lose the house. She lost her pride. And sometimes, that's the only lesson that sticks. Before we go further, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, because this story will remind you that silence is sometimes the sweetest revenge. But this didn't start yesterday. Oh no. This story begins years ago, when I was still naive enough to believe that love and kindness were always returned in equal measure. How foolish I was. Years earlier, I worked my fingers to the bone to build the very house she's now throwing me out of. You want to know what sacrifice looks like? It looks like a woman working double shifts as a school teacher, coming home with chalk dust under her fingernails and exhaustion in her bones, but still saving every single penny because she had a dream. A dream of owning something. Something that couldn't be taken away. Every brick in that house, every nail, every piece of wood. It came from my savings and my sacrifices. I remember counting coins at the kitchen table, month after month, year after year. I remember eating plain bread for dinner so I could put another $50 toward the house fund. I remember wearing the same worn dress to parent-teacher conferences because new clothes weren't a priority, my future was. And when my husband died, God rest his soul. When he left me alone with a 10-year-old boy and a mountain of grief that felt like it would crush me, did I give up? Did I sell my dreams for easy money? No. I worked harder. I bled more. I sacrificed everything because I had promised that boy, my only son, that we would have a home. A real home. I raised him alone, and let me tell you, that's not a job for the weak. I taught him honesty when it would have been easier to lie. I taught him humility when the world told him to be arrogant. I taught him respect when respect seemed to be dying all around us. I poured everything I had into that boy, hoping he would become a man I could be proud of. And for years, I thought I had succeeded. When my son married, I was so happy. Finally, I thought our little family would grow. I embraced his wife like she was my own daughter, cooking her favorite dishes until my back ached, calling her my daughter with genuine warmth in my voice. I gave her the love I would have given to the daughter I never had. I opened my heart completely, foolishly believing that she would cherish what I offered. But that's the thing about some people, they see love as weakness. They see kindness as an invitation to take advantage. They mistake generosity for stupidity. Over time, the warmth I had shown her began to turn into something else entirely. She started managing everything, the money, the guests, even what we ate for dinner. At first, I told myself she was just trying to help. She was young, energetic, maybe she thought I needed assistance. But deep down, something was gnawing at me. Something was wrong. The subtle disrespect became routine. Small comments here and there. Oh, we don't do things that way anymore. Times have changed, you know. Maybe you should rest and let us handle this. Each comment was like a tiny cut, so small you barely notice it, but they add up. They bleed you slowly until you realize you're dying from 1,000 wounds. I thought I was giving her a home. I didn't realize I was handing her my throne. The power shift happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice it. Like watching your hair turn gray, it doesn't happen overnight, but one day you look in the mirror and wonder when you became invisible. My daughter-in-law slowly began speaking for the household. When neighbors came to visit, she answered the door. When bills needed to be paid, she handled the money. When decisions needed to be made, she made them. And my son? My beloved son became quieter and quieter, a man torn between love and loyalty, watching his mother fade into the background of her own life. I watched as my own name disappeared from family decisions. Suddenly, I wasn't consulted about anything. The woman who had built this house, who had raised the man living in it, who had worked and saved and sacrificed for decades. I became a footnote in my own story. One evening, when I tried to voice my opinion about a family matter, she looked at me with eyes as cold as winter and said, "I think it's better if you don't interfere with young people's business." Young people's business. As if my years of experience, my wisdom, my very existence was somehow obsolete. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling I had paid for, in the room I had dreamed of, and I realized something that felt like a knife in my chest. I was living in my own home like a guest. Like someone who was being tolerated rather than respected. Like someone whose presence was an inconvenience. The humiliation was eating me alive from the inside. Every day, I felt smaller. Every day, I felt more invisible. Every day, I wondered how I had let this happen. How had I become a stranger in my own life? But the worst was yet to come. The deepest cut was still waiting for me. One morning, I returned from the grocery store. Because apparently, even at my age, I was still expected to contribute by running errands, and I found my daughter-in-law waiting for me. She was standing in the living room with a folder in her hands and an expression on her face that I will never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was satisfaction. The look of someone who was about to deliver a blow they had been planning for a long time. "So far, this house belongs to me," she said, her voice as cold as steel. "You have no place here anymore." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My knees almost buckled. My hands started shaking. But what came next was even worse. She dropped the eviction papers on the table like she was throwing away garbage. Legal documents. Official papers telling me to leave the house I had built with my blood, sweat, and tears. Papers that treated me like a tenant being kicked out by a landlord. And where was my son during all this? My son, the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for? He was standing beside her, silent as a tomb, his eyes fixed on the floor like a coward. He couldn't even look at me while his wife destroyed me. I looked at those documents, and something inside me died. But something else was being born. Something harder. Something that had learned to survive in a world that shows no mercy to the kind. I folded the papers quietly, and in a voice that was barely a whisper, I said, "If only you knew whose name is written on the real papers." No tears. No shouting. No begging or pleading. Just the sound of a lifetime's dignity being tested and refusing to break. That night, I sat at the same table where I had been humiliated. The eviction notice was beside me, along with a stack of old documents I hadn't looked at in years. Important papers. Papers that told the real story. The house deed. The mortgage receipts. Every proof of ownership. My name. My signature. My sacrifices turned into legal reality. The clock ticked in the silence, and my fingers rested on that faded signature. My name, written decades ago when I was young and hopeful and believed that hard work would protect me from people like her. They thought they were removing an old woman. But I was about to remind them I am the foundation of this home. I am the one who built it when they were nothing but dreams in their parents' minds. I am the one who owns it, legally and morally and spiritually. And as I sat there in the darkness, memories flooded back like a dam bursting. I remembered working as a school teacher, coming home exhausted but determined, saving every cent while other women my age were buying pretty dresses and going to movies. I remembered the sacrifice, the loneliness, the determination that kept me going when everything else wanted to quit. I remembered signing the bank papers the day I became a homeowner, my hand shaking with excitement and terror. 30 years old, widowed, with a young son and a dream that seemed impossible. But I made it happen. I made it real. I remembered standing in the rain with my young son as the first wall went up. We were both soaked to the skin, but we were smiling because we could see our future taking shape. Brick by brick, board by board, dream by dream. I remembered the day the roof was completed, how I stood in what would become our living room and whispered to that little boy, "We finally have a place of our own. No one can ever take this away from us." How naive I was. How beautifully, tragically naive. That house wasn't just a building. It was the proof of every struggle I had survived. It was my monument to persistence. It was my legacy. And some ungrateful child thought she could just take it from me with a piece of paper? The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and for the first time in months, I felt powerful again. I visited the local property registrar. I updated records, printed new certified copies, and sealed them in a gray folder. I called my lawyer, not with emotion, but with cold, calculated purpose. I didn't want to fight her in court. Courts are for people who need someone else to determine justice. I wanted her to read her own mistake with her own eyes. I wanted her to understand exactly how foolish she had been. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. My daughter-in-law returned home, probably expecting to find an empty house and a defeated old woman nowhere to be seen. Instead, she found me seated at the dining table, calm, collected, with a cup of tea beside me like I was waiting for a friend to visit. The look on her face when she saw me was priceless. Confusion, anger, fear. "I believe these belong to me," I said softly, sliding the gray folder across the table. Inside were the original title deed, the bank clearance letter, and the house registration, all bearing my name in clear, undeniable black ink. I watched the color drain from her face as reality hit her like a freight train. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. "You owned it all along," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I still do," I replied. And in that moment, I felt 20 years younger. The power had shifted back where it belonged. The student had just learned a lesson from the teacher. When my son walked in a few minutes later, confused by the tension in the room, I didn't even look up. I had said everything I needed to say. I stood slowly, with all the dignity of a queen reclaiming her throne. I folded the eviction papers she had given me and placed them gently on her lap. "Keep these," I said softly. "You might need them someday, when someone reminds you what you forgot to learn." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the clock ticking, marking the end of my humiliation and the beginning of her education. I walked outside into the sunlight, feeling the warmth hit my face like a blessing. The wind rustled through the garden I had planted decades ago, roses and jasmine and memories that would outlive all of us. Peace doesn't come from shouting. It doesn't come from revenge or cruelty or making others suffer. It comes when proof speaks louder than pain. It comes when truth finally has its day in court. The door closed behind me, not with anger, but with completion. Not with hatred, but with justice. In the weeks that followed, my son came to visit. He was remorseful, broken, finally understanding what he had allowed to happen. His wife had moved out, taking her arrogance with her. I decided to rent part of the house to a kind young couple who appreciated what they had. People who understood that a home is sacred. People who knew the difference between being welcomed and being entitled. I built this home out of love. I will fill it with peace again. I kept that eviction letter, framed it behind glass, and hung it beside my house deed, a reminder of strength earned through restraint. A reminder that dignity doesn't need to raise its voice to make itself heard. You see, if your kindness has ever been mistaken for weakness, if your generosity has ever been seen as stupidity, if your love has ever been treated like it's worthless, remember this story. Remember that silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes, it means dignity has decided to speak in its own time. True strength doesn't scream. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't need to destroy others to prove its worth. True strength simply proves. Like, subscribe, and share this story, so others remember that the quietest people often have the loudest truths. And when those truths finally speak, the whole world listens.